We'll see where that goes. So back to our topic this morning, the price of power. Garrett, Blaney, you're a commissioner from the Commission for Energy Regulation. So when my electricity bill arrives and it's high, yet again, I always tell my husband, well, that's your fault because you're the guy who sets the prices. You decide what we pay on our bills.
It's a difficult time for all consumers at the moment. Prices have gone up in Ireland. We've seen something like 8% rise over the last year in gas prices, 6% rise in electricity prices. But we're not unique. These price rises are happening across Europe. In the similar timeline, it's been over 20% increase in Great Britain in electricity prices and gas prices.
And what's driving those price increases?
The primary driver in this, and this is interesting for our discussion today, is the underlying fuel prices that go into both directly in the gas market, and that is a major contributor to the electricity market. So we're seeing rises as a result of closure of nuclear in Germany. We're seeing, a number of different factors. Oil prices have some bearing on it as well, that are driving up gas prices across Europe. In terms of where we stand against the European average, Ireland is actually slightly better against the European average than it has been. We've probably taken some good choices on renewables. We've much lower cost renewables in Ireland than some of the choices that were taken elsewhere in Europe. High cost PV cells and things have driven prices up elsewhere.
Sorry, what are those? I haven't heard of those.
These are solar panels. There's been massive expenditure on solar panels in Germany, in the UK, and a number of countries, and it's turned out to be very expensive for the consumer. Ireland has cheap cost wind that's pretty competitive against other renewable sources across Europe. So that's helped keep some moderation on prices. But we're not the cheapest in Europe. We're certainly not the most expensive. We're slightly better against the average, but we're round about the average in terms of our prices.
Okay, Ossian, Smyth. So I thought maybe for today's programme what we do is go through each of the sources of electricity and let's see if we can play them off against each other in terms of cost to the environment, their reliability. And Garrett mentioned there that we seem to have a good source of wind energy. But this is highly controversial because people don't like looking at these wind turbines. Will you give us the case for wind?
Well, I think that, if we remember back to when I was in school, we were told that Ireland was a country that had hardly any natural resources. There was a little bit of coal, a little bit of zinc, whatever. And there was our Kinsale gas field, which lasted a few years. And, all that time we had this wind blowing over the country and we didn't have the technology, the world didn't have the technology to really harvest that and to do something useful with it. It's only in the last 20 years that we've started to, and really then greatly in the last 10 years, to develop the kind of wind turbines that can generate useful electricity from all this wind. And Ireland turns out to be one of the windiest countries, certainly in Europe and if not in the world. So Scotland is next to us, after that Denmark. So we have all this free power blowing over the country.
But it's not free though, is it? Because to build those turbines, particularly offshore, is very expensive.
You're right. The capital cost is high, but there's no fuel cost ongoing and very little in the way of maintenance costs. So it costs, a multiple of the cost of building a gas power station to build wind, but at the same time, then you have no ongoing risk from spikes in fuel prices. And you just heard the energy regulator telling us that the reason that Irish people are cold in their houses, the reason that it's costing us more and more money to go to work and so on, is because of the volatile international price of fuel. And by bringing in all this wind power, and we have now 1 in 5 Irish homes is now powered with our own domestically produced wind. We are insulating ourselves, we are insuring ourselves against these price spikes, against this volatility. And what we're doing is exactly what Ryanair or Aer Lingus would do at the start of a year. They say, how can we protect ourselves against volatility in the fuel price market? We need to hedge. We need to do something to protect ourselves. So they buy futures against the movements in the price of fuel. And what we've done is we have insured ourselves by taking over a certain quantity of our electricity is going to be produced by wind that has no fuel input. And within 7 years, we're going to be at 40%. So, 40% of all our electricity is going to be domestically produced with no risk from outside factors. And with these new projects that are coming up, I would say that by 2025, we could be entirely independent on the basis of electricity. We could be producing enough electricity within the country to supply all of our needs. And this is a huge turnaround. This is a transformational time for Ireland, that we could go from a country that's utterly dependent on imports to one that's actually self-sufficient and exporting as well in the electricity market.
Now, Denis, Duff, does that stack up?
Well, a lot of what Ossian said is true, but I think it's important to realise that there's a certain limitation. There's once you go too heavy on wind, there's a kind of a payback period that just isn't realistic. For instance, I had a look today before I came out here, and I realised that out of the 2,000 megawatts of wind that's installed at the moment, it's not very windy today. The wind isn't producing much. It's producing 30 megawatts out of 2,000. If you try to imagine replacing a large nuclear plant with just wind turbines today, you would need 100,000 megawatts worth of wind turbine in. You would need 35,000 machines about 500 foot tall, costing about 200 billion euros. Just right now at the moment, to generate the same amount of electricity as from a large nuclear station. So while renewables and wind have a role to play and very, very useful, there's a limitation on how far we can go. And I believe we're kind of coming close to that limit now, that economic payback.
So Garrett, how much of our electricity is being produced by wind at the moment, roughly?
At the moment, sort of on the average, if we look at the average across the year, we're up to a 20% level. Now that's good at a European. When I talk to fellow regulators across Europe, that's in with the sort of the best at a European, the Germans, the Spanish. There's a number of countries are of similar level, but we're pretty much sort of best.
And are these all the ones, say, up the mountains that you might see along the north and west coast, or any of these offshore? Where are the turbines?
They're all onshore.
Right.
In Ireland, I think there's one small offshore trial that would.
And why don't we go offshore? You know, because
the offshore is more expensive.
Right.
I mean, there is a question of cost in all of this. If we come back to the consumer, 10% of the consumers at the moment in Ireland are struggling to pay their bills. We need to find the technologies that meet their needs, to put downward pressure on prices. The consumers are hard pressed at the moment. We need to try and keep cost in as part of the equation here. And I think we need to be careful we don't think that there's a single technology that's somehow going to solve everything. That's not possible. Energy systems are complicated. They need a mix of efficient technologies. And part of what's needed is we need to try and engage the consumer more. We're looking at technologies like smart meters that will help change the way people consume energy so that we can get more efficient use of the energy system and keep the costs down to consumers.
Just sticking with wind for a minute, Ossian, isn't one of the problems with wind in that you do need what they call redundancy? Like, what do you do on a day when there's no wind?
Oh, well, that's easy. I mean, we have enough power to power Ireland already when there is no wind. I mean, when the wind completely drops, do the lights go out? No, they don't. So we have plenty of power already. And what we're doing additionally to that is that we're slinging wires over to Britain. We're looking at doing this over to France. We've got 2 large connectors to the UK already. Each one can take 10% of all our energy needs for Ireland. And what we can do is, at a time when we have no wind, we can import power, cheap surplus power from renewable energy from the UK. At a time when we have a surplus of wind, we can export the other direction.
And is it that flexible? You know, are we able to say, oh, right, well, we don't have enough power at the moment, so we'll just buy that from England now? Or do you not have to have some kind of contract where you guarantee you're going to take
There are complicated contracts that govern, which the energy regulator will be able to correct me about, but that govern there's a north-south interconnector that goes through Northern Ireland and into Scotland, and there's another one that goes under the sea just been built between Wales and North Dublin. So both of these, I believe, are bidirectional and allow for electricity trade, and they're perfect for renewable energy, because what you find with renewable energy, as Denis has told us, is that from time to time you are in surplus and from time to time you're in deficit, and if you can balance these over a larger area, you get a better solution.
Denis, 10 seconds ago you were nodding your head, now you're shaking it.
I was nodding in that the interconnector is a two-way street and energy can flow either way, but the concept that it might be not windy in Ireland but it would be windy in England and Scotland, and we import wind energy from there while it's not windy here. It's just not on. I think the 2 regulators north and south of the border here did a study on it and of the interconnector, and even if we got to the 40% wind figure, which we've achieved the easy 18% so far, 20%, getting the next 20% up to 40% altogether is going to be very difficult. But
why? What's the problem there?
Because we have taken the good sites. We have a reasonable amount of wind energy. We have 2,000 megawatts worth of wind at the moment. Our average demand in Ireland is only 3,000 megawatts.
And Ossian, isn't that the problem? Now you're talking about projects like this one in the Midlands, where if you want more of these turbines, they're going to have to get closer and closer to people's houses. Now, Pat is suggesting that we put a wind farm outside Leinster House because there's enough wind in there to power the country, he says. And another texter says he lives near a wind farm in Galway way, and most people in the area love them. They are a source of pride and look great. Now, I do think there is a certain elegance to them, but I don't have to live beside one.
No, and I think there's a limit to how many wind turbines you can have in a country, of course. And I think that, we've got 1,000 so far. To get to 40%, we need another 1,000. And then this project in the Midlands is looking at another 1,000. I think you're probably reaching, that's about enough, isn't it? And and you're thinking about where you would put a wind turbine. Of course you can't put a 200-metre wind turbine beside somebody's house. I certainly wouldn't want that. But there are 200,000 acres of stripped bog in the Midlands, right? I think that sounds like a pretty good place to stay. With a constant 6 metre per second wind flow, I think that sounds like a good place to stick it.
Dennis, is the bog windy enough?
Those wind farm projects in the Midlands, while they may be useful from the point of view of exporting energy to the UK, they will not be connected to the Irish grid in any manner. They will not feed into our energy system whatever. And the previous point is making with the two regulators north and south of the border, when they looked at the usage of the interconnector, they found that we would be importing energy for 86% of the time and only exporting for 3% of the time. So it's a complete fallacy to say that our own wind energy can be exported at great values. Well, it will cost us more.
Michael's texting in, the British have outsourced power requirements to Ireland, which will destroy our long-term tourism economy and landscape, and most of the jobs will go to European manufacturers and suppliers. On the wind debate, Garrett, I'll give you the final word. What do you favour?
Well, there's an issue. There's technical issues with wind and the level of wind on the system. At the moment we're up to a 50% level, so instantaneously on a given a windy day we can take 50% of the total demand from wind, and then we have to limit the amount of wind on the system. We're working with the system operator EirGrid to try and improve that to 75%. We need to do that in a cost-efficient way. We think things like smart meters, things that encourage the consumer to consume it, because when the wind blows, the price goes down. When the wind isn't blowing, the price goes up. We need to start to get these types of signals back into consumers.
Sorry, which price goes up?
The wholesale price. The
right.
wholesale price now, it's a single price across the island. So ourselves and the northern regulators co-regulate the market across the whole island. And it's very, it depends on the technologies, and wind is a key component of that price. So we are seeing wind energy having big influence already on the system. We need to integrate it in a cost-efficient way for consumers, and part of that will actually be the consumer themselves engaging. Now, we've heard Denis talk about nuclear technology. There are major technical challenges with nuclear technology for a small system like Ireland. The size of units that are there internationally that are currently, operating are far too large for the Irish system. There's issues of flexibility with nuclear plants, particularly with
what kinds of issues?
Well, with a small system and with much more wind in the system, we need all the rest of the plant to be very flexible. Denis mentioned that it's 30 megawatts today. It's a nice bright day, but there's very little wind. So all the other technologies have to ramp up quickly. When the wind comes on, all the other technologies ramp down, and we need to ensure that a much higher level of flexibility in the system. Nuclear doesn't provide that flexibility, and there's a big technological challenge. The current designs of nuclear won't fit in the Irish system.
Dennis.
No, that was the case. But if people think that a nuclear reactor can't react quickly, can't power up, how do nuclear submarines go from 0 speed to full speed in 10 seconds? Of course, nuclear reactors can load follow. They can ramp up the output really, really quickly. They were never designed that way up to this, because they've been designed for base load, for continuous operation. There are a new breed of smaller reactors coming out in around about 8 to 10 years' time, which will be designed for countries like us to allow us to ramp up the power very, very quickly at 10% per minute. They can go down to 20% of their max load overnight.
And of course, nuclear doesn't leave a carbon footprint, is that right?
It's one of the very, very low carbon emitters. It's about as low as hydro and as wind, and perhaps if they really get their act together on carbon capture and storage, which you don't want to go to.
So, Ossian, presumably the Green Party is fully in favour of nuclear energy then, as it doesn't leave a carbon footprint.
Yeah, no, we're not. And particularly in Ireland, I don't think realistically anyone is looking at nuclear power.
But why aren't we? Is that just prejudice? We hear nuclear and we go, wind scales,
Well, for a start, it's illegal. The 1999 Electricity Act makes nuclear power illegal, so you would need primary legislation in order to change that. Isn't that mad? It's the will of the people. There was 2 years ago there was a referendum in Italy about nuclear power, and there was a 94% of the population voted to ban nuclear power. It's not popular in Germany, it's not popular in Italy, it's not popular in democratic countries.
It is in France.
And It is in France. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, it's prevalent in France. But if you look at surveys of the population, it's not so popular anymore. If you look at the areas where nuclear power is being developed, it's primarily dictatorships like Russia and China, where you can force people to take things whether they want it or not.
India.
Yeah, but Denis, why do you think? Well, I suppose in a way it's obvious why people think. Is it just that it's got a bad press and a bad image? Nuclear, Fukushima, all the Chernobyl. People hear the word and they think radiation, people dying, accidents.
Yeah, I think it probably started back way in during the Cold Wars and that kind of stuff. When people were talking about nuclear, at that time they talked about nuclear weapons. Now, this nuclear power is completely different to nuclear weapons. A nuclear power station cannot explode like a nuclear weapon can. It is a physical impossibility. Latterly, I think there's been a lot of fear mongering. I think you mentioned Sellafield and Windscale. It's the same place, just renamed. Yeah. And it's not a nuclear power plant, it's a nuclear reprocessing plant. The Irish government 3 years ago commissioned a report into what's the worst possible thing could happen in Sellafield. And they found that even if a meteorite dropped on Sellafield, there would be no measurable health impact on the people of Ireland. Right? Sellafield is not a danger to the people of Ireland, but some people continue to peddle this. I'm not sure if to try to scare people, is it to try and promote their own political view, to try and promote their own wind operation, or whatever it is. Because they realise that if once nuclear comes into Ireland, it will blow the wind case out of the water.
Now, Garrett Blaney, you actually worked in a nuclear power station.
That's right, yes, I started my career in a nuclear power station, so I understand the technology. To me, the question is not just technological, it's a question of cost. We need to come back to, the Irish consumer can't afford to have extra costs laboured on them. So whatever technologies, and certainly as a regulator, we're technology neutral. Our approach is we want the best technologies there, and we have set up an efficient market to let the market decide what the technologies are.
Well, one of our texters is saying, would nuclear be more popular if they knew it would half their bills? Irish people need to hear things in money. Would nuclear mean cheaper energy?
Good question. The very high upfront cost. It's a bit like wind in that sense, that it's got a very high upfront cost, capital cost. Unfortunately, the 2 nuclear plants that are being built in Europe at the moment have had major overruns, so that their capital costs are going up, both in France and in Finland. There's a question about the costs. The running costs of nuclear are mainly around what do you do with the fuel and how do you reprocess or process the fuel. Also insurance costs. Who's going to insure a nuclear plant against the potential, albeit a relatively risk? The risk is still there of an accident, as we've seen in Fukushima. And the last cost then is the back-end cost. The decommissioning cost of nuclear is a big unknown and is very difficult. And for that reason, for the cost uncertainties, it's been very difficult for the market to actually raise capital. So the question for me, in my mind, is if somebody can show somehow that if the technology solution works, and that also it can be cost effective for the consumer, but I'm not convinced, and I certainly haven't seen any figures that says it would be a great option for
Denis,
Ireland.
convincing.
Yeah, I think Garrett's experience in the UK with a large nuclear plant, what he said about the large plants is absolutely right. But now there are smaller plants coming about. Garrett's plant was over 1,000 megawatts in size. We're talking about plants around about 200 megawatts, and there are plenty of power stations in Ireland of that size or greater. Because of the small size, they will be producing a number of them, so they'll have economies of scale. It's going to bring the price of them down to lower on a per unit basis.
Do you believe it would provide cheaper electricity?
Oh, absolutely. We could replace, just for instance, right, if you just had a kind of mind thought here, to say if we replaced Money Point in 2025, is when it comes towards its end of life, with 6 small nuclear reactors, about 200 megawatts each. It would, of course, lower the price of electricity in Ireland. These things can park themselves overnight at very, very low output.
And sorry, are you taking into account not just the cost of generating that electricity, but say spreading the costs of construction and the decommissioning and that Garrett was mentioning over time?
What you can do is you can build one. These will be less than 1/5 of the cost of the large plants that they're building in Europe at the moment. You build one, and while it's producing cheap electricity, it's funding the building of the others.
Ossian, I'm convinced.
I think realistically, Money Point is going to have to be replaced in around 2025.
And it burns coal, right?
It burns coal, yeah. And there is a big debate about what should replace it. Yeah. And I think the chance of nuclear replacing it is close to zero. I think, as Denis was saying.
But is that just because of the political problem? If you took the politics and the psychology out of it,
even the politics aside, but the politics has to be considered. But even if you took that aside, and you said, okay, no matter what people want, we're going to force this in. As the regulator was saying, the size of a nuclear power station is a problem. And Denis is saying to that, what he's saying is, we can use this future technology, we can use this thing that's coming down the tracks, these small nuclear reactors, which will, these future things that from Toshiba or something, are they, or what are they? They're 200 megawatts.
There's a number of American and Japanese and Chinese and the Indians are doing it, the Russians are doing it, and all the major nuclear places are doing it.
These are future technology, and they don't exist. And in order to plan and deploy a nuclear power station, you're looking at maybe 7 years in a normal country. In Ireland, maybe 15 years. So if you're going to look at that for technology that's going to come on stream in 2022, maybe you're going to be looking at getting it ready by about 2040, which will be too late. We need something to come in 2025. So
I have to take a break, but Garrett, would you just sum up quickly for me what exactly is happening with nuclear power plants in Germany? Because I keep hearing different stories. Have been decommissioned? Did they change their minds? What was the Germans' position?
Well, based on the events in Japan and Fukushima, what they've decided to do in Germany is to phase out much more quickly. Obviously, the plants were going to run out of the end of their life anyway. So that was they basically had a very fast shutdown of all the plants in Germany. That's had a big effect on Europe because that's a significant amount of electricity capacity that was lost. It's affected not just Germany, but it's also affected the countries around it. And that has had upward pressure on prices. Nuclear plants, once they're come to the end of their life, they're relatively cheap to run at that point.
So does this mean we actually get to blame the Germans for something else now, including the cost of our electricity? Listen, I have to take a break now. We'll be back with more after these.
Talking Point with Sarah Carey on Newstalk 106 to 108.
We all seem to care where our burgers come from lately. But do we care where our coffee beans come from? Or wonder whether the people who picked the cocoa beans that went into our chocolate got a fair deal? This week on Global Village, being Fair Trade Fortnight, we ask, how fair is fair trade and how far will you go for it?
Global Village with Dil Vikramasinghe. Saturday evenings from 7 on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Traffic's at a standstill out there. Totally gridlocked, and if you're...
Every evening it's the same. I could walk home faster. Get right back at you, pal. I think I need a holiday.
Need a holiday? Just visit abbeytravel.ie and choose from hundreds of the best travel deals. To the sun, to the slopes, to the USA and Australia. Plus city breaks, cruises and adventure holidays. Wherever you want to go to abbeytravel.ie. Abbey Travel, a world of travel experience.
Christy Kinahan, the Dapper Don, ruled gangland with an iron fist. Now, as he rots behind bars, the Irish Sun reveals the secret files that expose his criminal empire, the drugs, and the money laundering. Read this explosive story only in the Irish Sun.
It's time for a bit of spring cleaning. But if you really want to clean up, don't miss the Renault Spring Clean this Monday to Saturday. Buy any new Renault this week only and save thousands with 0% finance. Plus, get the peace of mind that comes with a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty and 5,000 kilometres of free fuel. Clean up this week at Renault Bellegarde. Renault. Quality made. Finance is made by way of hire purchase. Terms apply subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
With all the handshakes and playing hardball, there's enough business on your business trip. So let getting to the airport be a bit more of a pleasure and avoid the frantic search for exact change and all the small talk about the weather. Book up to 3 weekdays in the short-term car park at dublinairport.com and for a limited time receive our special offer of complimentary fast track to make the journey even quicker. And better still, your car's right there waiting for you on your way back. Dublin Airport parking. Get closer, quicker. Terms and conditions apply.
Talking Point with Sarah Carey on Newstalk 106 to 108.
And you're very welcome back to Talking Point. We're asking, where is our energy going to come from and how much is it going to cost? In studio, Ossian Smyth is the Green Party spokesperson on energy. Denis Duff is Secretary of Better Environment with Nuclear Energy. And Garrett Blaney is a Commissioner from the Commission for Energy Regulation. You can text us on 53106 for 30 cents. And there are loads of texts coming in. And some people in Newstalk said we couldn't do a programme on energy. It would be too boring. But clearly it's not. Des in Cork says, nuclear is not a renewable energy, so it is not a long-term solution. solution. Uranium is a finite supply with massive clean-up costs. No to nuclear. Paddy says nuclear is a good answer to our energy problem. How you ask the question is important. Spiralling energy costs won't be solved by Dublin 6 hippies. I didn't know there were hippies in Dublin 6. I thought they were all in West Cork. Peter says if we're importing electricity, surely some of it might be nuclear generated. I think it is, Garrett. I think technically we can't say we're not depending on nuclear energy, can we?
I mean, certainly there's a lot of nuclear in the UK, and the energy that comes over across the interconnector. You know, it's difficult exactly how you calculate that, but you know, it is true that we're getting it from the UK.
Tim in Killarney says, look what the ESB did with the dam in Cork. How can we trust them with nuclear plant? Yeah, it kind of looked like. I don't know if it was ever officially decided that the ESB flooded Cork. Garrett, did everything ever happen about that after those storms? Do you remember there was the row when they released all the water into the river and Cork was flooded? Was that ever officially decided whose fault that was?
Not sure I've seen anything on it. Certainly wasn't an area for ourselves.
Right, okay. And finally, Tom says, how about the sneaky little secret of the power companies? Standing charges higher on night rate power and very little encouragement to use it. The energy needs of the country could be much better balanced if we all had night rate and used appliances at night. No need for smart meters. We're going to try and get onto that before we finish the programme, but I want to have a quick chat about coal. So Ossian Smyth, so coal is, it's filthy, pumping carbon into the air, but sometimes I hear talk about how there is going to be some new method of cleaning up coal.
Okay, so there is some hope that we can develop some technology called carbon capture and storage. And this simple idea of this is that we collect all the CO2 as it comes out of a power station, and then we channel it somewhere, perhaps put it underground, perhaps put it into a disused mine shaft, into an empty gas well or whatever. And CO2 is heavier than air, so it will stay down there. You hope you stick some kind of cork in it, and then you hope it never gets out. And this is unfortunately there's a number of drawbacks to this. It's something that we really hope will work in the future. But there are drawbacks. For example, it makes the power station less efficient, so you need to burn more fuel, which is so it increases the costs and the bills go up. There is a danger that this gas will escape, and this isn't just theoretical danger. This has actually happened, where CO2 is poisonous and it escapes out into the landscape, and animals start dying and so on. And potentially you've got a problem there. And you wonder, how long can you actually contain it underground? Is this a good idea, or will it just sort of leak out over time and go back into the atmosphere anyway?
I'm always reminded of that episode of The Simpsons where Springfield decided that they would take a landfill site, and all the rubbish from the rest of America was just being buried under Springfield until it all exploded.
Yeah, I'm sure
that image comes into my mind.
I'm sure Denis hates The Simpsons, because I'd say The Simpsons has been the single greatest argument against nuclear power in the public mind for the last 20 years. That a generation of children, my own included, who've grown up thinking that nuclear power gives us three-eyed fish, and I think that it's going to be very, very hard to get past that. Generally, the public have to agree with something, and it's when it becomes the primary political issue, as it did in Japan, and no party could get elected unless they said we're going to shut down every power station, then it becomes very difficult to develop nuclear.
Actually, Denis, isn't this the fundamental problem? All of these things we're talking about, coal is dirty, people are afraid of nuclear, they don't want to look at wind turbines. Generating electricity is ugly.
Oh, it's a difficult business, it really is. But then again, living on Earth, if you had an intergalactic health and safety inspector came along and said, what about living on this planet where it's been bombarded by protons and all kinds of radiation from the sun, where it's out living in a vacuum, minus 273 degrees centigrade, a few hundred miles away from here? He said, no, don't do that. But we evolved on the planet. It's been radioactive since it was made. It's still radioactive. The planet itself, the table here has radioactivity. You have radioactivity in you. Is it harming you?
I'm glowing.
A bit. Not a bit. Do you need it for survival? Probably do. You wouldn't have evolved if you hadn't got a certain amount of it. So we have a certain natural ability to incorporate radioactivity in our lives, and without it we probably wouldn't exist.
Garrett, do you think that's a fundamental problem, that people plug in all their appliances at home, but they just don't want to have to see or feel the dirty, ugly business of actually generating the electricity?
I mean, I think it's at this stage now in society, electricity is no longer something that's a sort of optional. People have to have electricity. They have to have reliable electricity. Reliability is a key factor. We have had a fantastic record in Ireland of a reliable energy source. then it means
yeah, because that's not something to sniff at. Like California,
investors will not come to Ireland. You know, the large, multinationals who come to Ireland will not come here unless they can rely on the energy supply, and they also want a reasonable cost of that electricity supply. So from a consumer point of view, at some level, the consumer, I'm not sure, cares too much, as long as they know when they switch the light on that it'll be there and that it's a reasonable price. And I think from our point of view, we have to all continuously keep that in focus and not get caught up in some interesting debates about technology and miss the consumer impact and all of this.
Ossian, what about using less electricity? Why do people have electric showers for 15 minutes? Like, are we just going to have to accept we're using too much of the stuff?
Well, I think energy efficiency is not the same as, hardship and wearing a hair shirt. Energy efficiency means doing the same with less, So, in other words, that you can keep your house properly heated because you've insulated it, but you don't have to use as much electricity. So, I think there's a kind of confusion there.
But do you know what happens with those? We built our own house, and I know we had loads of options at the time. Well, you could put in solar panels and geothermal heating, and there were all these magic things you could do. But it required a big investment up front. And I think that's where people hesitate when it comes to this, not just as a nation, but individually.
Yeah, and in fact, there were a number of grants from the government through the SEAI where you could obtain some kind of funding for putting in some kind of renewable energy, and unfortunately they were all cancelled, apart from solar water heating, which is still worth doing. So if you put in solar water tubes in your roof, you can heat a tank of water in your house and then use that instead of using an electric shower. And, it works better in the summer than the winter, certainly. It has a payback time, maybe 12 years. And that payback time is absolutely dependent on the future price of oil and gas. So there are things you can do.
Denis, what about that issue, the resistance to investing, not just on a national level, but at an individual level?
It's very understandable. Insulation is the best thing you can do at home. Insulate your house. Yeah. But then what happens if you move in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
And when you get a grant is great, but a grant isn't free money. It's got to come out of your taxes, and then people are objecting to paying the taxes. I think the big changes in energy efficiency has been as a source of generation. When I started off in power generation, our plants were maybe 40% efficient.
Did you work in the ESB?
Oh, I did, yeah. I'm semi-retired now. I've left the ESB and I've gone employed elsewhere. And one thing I'm looking at is trying to install some small, medium reactors, because I really believe that this is part of the solution for Ireland. It's not the only solution. We'll need renewables, we'll need wind, we'll need gas. Gas is half as dirty as coal, so it's not a free ride. We'll need nuclear. We may need, I hope we don't, but we may need clean coal or carbon capture and storage. It's an horrendous project. But the efficiency of the plant where I left at the end of my career was towards 55% efficient. When it's at full load. When it's at half load, it goes back down towards 40%.
Right. So, Garrett, that issue of resistance to investing. So we're so dependent on this electricity. We really, really need it, and people don't want to invest in it.
I think it's a very important point about the cost of capital. The cost of raising finance has been a major challenge. It's something we've struggled with as a regulator. The downturn in the economy, the problem with the euro has all had an impact on the raising of finance.
And are you talking there about for private companies that want to generate
even for state companies, but right. Both, yeah, it's very important, and this is the importance of having a clear regulatory structure, a clear set of rules. It's extremely important that that's set out so that investors know and have confidence that they can make long-term investments.
There used to be a myth, which I think I peddled myself at one point, that part of the reason electricity prices were going up, that in order to make it a viable business for private entrants into the market, they needed to be guaranteed a certain return, because their fixed costs were so high. Is that true?
No, that's not true. And it's been quite clear even that at the point we don't regulate electricity prices now. There's enough competition in the market. And as soon as we stopped the regulation, we didn't see any major change in prices. That was a sort of a myth, really, that there was out there around the regulation. Come back to the issue of electricity and electricity usage, and we talk about energy efficiency. But if we're looking at, and there's a large debate internationally about decarbonisation, there's a strong argument that we actually need to use more electricity to have lower emissions going forward. If we look at electricity as an alternative to burning peat, burning, oil, burning,
why are we
coal,
still burning peat?
The electricity, particularly if it's coming from a high level of renewable sources, is much more efficient. And particularly if we can use it in a flexible way. I know there's a lot of interesting Irish companies looking at storage heaters, the generation of storage heaters that are much more flexible, much better at solve some of the old traditional problems in storage heaters. We need to look at things that can be done by the consumer.